Dye transfer. When dealing with dye transfer from jeans or other clothing onto fabrics, most people are unsuccessful as they don't follow the standard chemistry rules. Dye transfers that occur on upholstery from fabric, usually because of the heat of the body, has released unstable dyes from jeans or trousers that the person is wearing. The dye transfer contains ink-based and acid dyes. It's therefore logical that to remove them we must use a type of solvent to rinse out any solvent-soluble inks, and then we'll need to use a very alkaline spotter to remove the acid dyes that we know are also in this dye that are left behind. The first step, having done all the pre-testing needed, is to apply a dry solvent to blot away any solvent-soluble ink-type dyes. So we're going to start with that. And we're going to, as usual, wear our P1, P2 mask because we're using solvents. We're going to have gloves, and we've studied our safety data sheet to make sure we've got all the correct personal protective equipment on. And we've opened windows for ventilation too. So the first step is to start on the stain, obviously working towards the centre of the spot. Checking for any transfer from the dye. And even though this is a very faint dye, it's still very noticeable on a pale piece of upholstery. And we are getting some transfer, however faint that appears. And because that's fairly faint, but there is a tiny amount of residue, I'm going to try and swap over here onto a blended solvent. A blended solvent being much more effective than an evaporating solvent. So let's get one of those out now. This is a blended solvent product. In fact, a non-evaporating type of blended solvent. We're going to apply this to another part of the cloth. So not overdoing it because we don't want it to go right through into the other side. We're going to see if we can get any more transfer with that one. Usually blended solvents are much more efficient. And you see we've got a little bit more transfer happening there. And we're working in towards the centre of the spot. Checking carefully as we go. And because we've used a blended solvent there, we've got to rinse that out using a solvent that's a volatile version so that will rinse out the non-soluble one here and remove all the residue that might appear like a sort of oily stain, which is actually not water but a blend of solvents that don't evaporate away. So that would leave us an area where that's going to evaporate and the solvent has removed most of the dye. So any residue that's left behind then we use a high pH spotter. We're going to get the right one. This has unfortunately got a nice flip top. So this alkaline spotter is going to allow us to release any of the acid dyes that are still in there. Notice we're not using a spatula or anything on this. We want to be very careful not to damage the upholstery or to break any of the weave. So certainly that's the next step. To rinse that out we'd use water, or we could use our extraction machine if we've got a spotting machine or a large machine set up. We can go over that to rinse that out. And as you can see when we check with our pH paper, we've got an alkaline surface, so we don't want to leave that behind in the upholstery. We need to leave, so that can actually start working on the dyes as well. So what we need to do is leave an area that's not got any high pH in it at all. So we can try and rinse that out, preferably with an acid. And you will have something like a tannin spotter perhaps, anything with an acid pH, which will neutralise down the alkaline that's in the surface. Once we've got a nice neutral area, we can then decide if there's any dye left behind, and there is a slight residue there left behind. We're going to then go for a dye remover. So it doesn't really matter what kind, we're going to go for an oxidising one, because often they are quicker. These are often better sprayed, but they don't always come with spray tops. So we're going to put that on there. Preferably leaving enough residue behind so that that can work on the spot, and it continues to oxidise all the time that that's wet. And it continues to remove the stain and hide it behind the chemicals. So the chemical changes the nature of the stain surface itself so that it becomes invisible. And as you can see, hopefully on the video, the difference between the area with the stain and the area where it's been removed, and that will continue to work now as that dries. So keep moisture to a minimum, dry as you go, and keep it as cool as possible so as not to set the dyes. The dye transfer will then be removed. Tar stain removal. Tar can be found on either carpets or upholstery. It can be walked in, especially in new housing estates when roads are being laid. Tar contains coal tar or petrol, sulphur compounds and fillers, and as with most stains that are more complex, you will need to apply various solvent types to remove this safely from textiles. If the textile cannot be cleaned with a solvent, such as this flocked sample here, where we've applied a solvent to the surface, and as you can see, the fibre tufts have come away from the backing completely. Obviously you wouldn't be able to remove any kind of tar from this surface. It will be very difficult, if not impossible, to remove. But any textile that can be dry cleaned, you will find you can remove the stain type safely and effectively from the surface. The first step is to remove any solids with a spatula or a round-ended knife. So here we're going to scrape this off, trying not to spread the stain as we go. This gives the product much more chance to work on the actual tar itself. So making life a bit easier for the product itself. So we're going to use our P1, P2 mask. We've done some careful pre-testing with products on the edges so we don't wet the surface, and we realise that we're going to have to use solvents for this. So then we apply the solvent. We're going to start as usual with an evaporating solvent. The reason we use this first is because it evaporates away and doesn't need rinsing, and it will save an awful lot of time for us on site. These are not always the best things to use, but they certainly are worth a try first. And as you can see, we've got some transfer happening, but be very careful not to reapply the product back to the surface again, and not to apply any of the tar back, because you can be making the stain worse. So there you see some transfer. I'm going to try the non-evaporating solvent as well, just to show that you can see the difference. This is a blended solvent. Usually they are blended to make them much more effective on stains. These, however, do need rinsing out, as we said earlier in the other example in this same video. We need to rinse them out with a volatile solvent. In this case, because of the complexity of the types of dyes in tar, you can see this is not quite so effective as the evaporating one. But we're still getting out some transfer. Looks like we've got most of the bulk away first. So we need to continue blotting and turning. If there's an awful lot of this, and maybe there are a few patches where people have walked, you may want to save some time in blotting and turning and apply a solid solvent. So here we've got one which is a gel type solvent. There are various ones that you can use. The easiest way to get these to work is to shake them. You'll notice the sound will change as you shake this when it becomes more solid and less liquid, because they are whipped up with a helicopter blade actually to create this type of gel, so they do need remixing together to make them effective. And in this case we don't apply it to the cloth, we put the solid, as you can see it's not coming out, onto the surface of the tar itself. And what that will do is break down the tar, make it much more easy to get out, and remove it from the actual pieces of fabric itself. So we can then go off and apply some to another stain and let that work along and give it time to work. Once that's had some time to work, and often it can be 5 or 10 minutes, but we're going to try to get this out straight away. We're going to give it a bit more of a chance because the fabric's it's obviously gone into the fabric where someone's walked on this. And we're going to work into the spot, removing the gel as we go. Trying to let you see this process. Working in. You can see we've got a lot more transfer there. Obviously work in line with the fibres, don't damage the surface of the fibres as you go. And then we're going to block this again. Taking out any residue of the gel solvent that's left behind. Obviously this is a non-evaporating solvent, so it will need to be rinsed out, and you need to continue to do this while there's still being some transfer coming out until this is completely gone. Because this can be quite a time consuming process, as you can see here, and we are doing this in real time, you may need to obviously start the process straight away. Put the gel on immediately if you think you might need to do a few more pieces, and persevere. Don't give up with this because it will come out and you will keep getting transfer, but again it might be a slow process. Once you feel you've got everything out of here, and obviously you still haven't got everything out of this stain, once that's actually settled then and all of the solvent soluble ingredients have come away, the last thing we need to do, and this is actually rinsing out the non-evaporating solvent as well as removing more of the tar. It might need several applications of solvents to completely remove, but the tar will then be removed. We need to then apply a good detergent spotter or a high alkaline rinsing detergent in the tank of your spotting or extraction machine, and blot this out with water and rinse and dry, and then test the pH obviously at the end. So as long as you have got all of the equipment available, this is just something that takes time, but as you can see it is removing and still transferring out, and this is going to take a time, probably maybe another 10 minutes of blotting and turning with the solvent. Choose the solvent that works best for you. If you feel that the gel is better, or you feel that the dry solvent or the blended solvent are better, choose the one that's the most effective on the tar that you have, and just continue and persevere.